Before you continue, remember, every story I tell here hides more truth than fiction. If you want to uncover what the media won't show you, subscribe now, turn on the notifications, and stay until the end. What happened in Los Angeles isn't just a story, it's a warning. The Mara Salvatrucha didn't send a message to the police. They sent it to all of us. Watch closely, because what you're about to see may change the way you look at your own city forever. It began on a gray morning in Los Angeles, the kind of dawn when the city's hum still feels half asleep. But on that day, silence was broken not by traffic or sirens, but by fire. Cars burned on the east side of the city, smoke rising like dark fingers over the skyline. On the walls of several blocks, Boyle Heights, Echo Park, South Central, the same symbol appeared, sprayed in black and blue, the devil horns of Mara Salvatrucha. Below it, a message written in chilling, deliberate letters: Los Angeles belongs to us. For those who knew the history, it wasn't graffiti, it was a declaration of war. Residents woke to the chaos, their phones buzzing with videos filmed through curtains and broken blinds. The images spread online before the authorities could contain them. Men in black hoodies and masks, moving in groups, coordinated and silent, left behind the same mark wherever they passed. The letters MS-13 weren't random. They were a ghost from the past, one that the city thought it had buried decades ago. The morning news called it vandalism. The police called it intimidation. But for those who lived in the neighborhoods, it was something much worse. It was a reminder that power, once lost, was now being reclaimed. By noon, the story had already reached national television. The anchors spoke with the usual cautious tone, repeating official statements from the LAPD that there was no reason for panic. Yet, panic had already taken root. Parents pulled their children from schools in the East Districts. Local businesses closed their doors early. The scent of burnt gasoline still hung in the air. The message wasn't meant to be read. It was meant to be felt. Behind the scenes at Parker Center, police commanders held an emergency meeting. The city hadn't seen this level of organized gang intimidation since the early 2000s. But something was different now. The attack wasn't spontaneous, it was theatrical. The fires, the symbols, the simultaneous timing, it was all staged with military precision. Detective Luis Ortega, one of the department's gang specialists, leaned over the table and said what everyone feared to admit. This isn't just local. They're sending a message from outside. His words froze the room. Everyone knew what he meant. Outside meant El Salvador. Outside meant the original core of the Mara Salvatrucha network, the same group that had turned Central America into a playground of fear. The next day, a video surfaced online. The image was grainy, recorded in what looked like an abandoned warehouse. 3 men stood before a wall marked with the same symbol, the devil horns and the words MS-13. One of them spoke, his face hidden behind a black scarf. "You forgot who owns the streets," he said in accented English. "We haven't gone anywhere. We only waited for you to forget." His tone wasn't loud or angry. It was calm, almost businesslike. Behind him, the faint sound of a woman crying echoed off camera. Authorities later confirmed it was a kidnapped community activist who had publicly spoken against gang influence months earlier. She was never found. The city entered lockdown mode. Patrols multiplied, helicopters scanned the night sky, and checkpoints appeared across the city. But the fear had already done its job. The Mara didn't need to fight a war with bullets. Their weapon was silence. People stopped talking, stopped calling the police, stopped trusting the system. The code of the streets, ver oír y callar, see, hear and stay silent, returned stronger than ever. In neighborhoods like MacArthur Park and Huntington Park, locals whispered that the cartel was recruiting again, paying cash to young men to watch the corners, to deliver messages. What terrified the authorities most wasn't the violence, it was the discipline. The FBI's gang unit, working alongside Homeland Security, intercepted encrypted messages between Los Angeles and San Salvador. The communications weren't random chatter. They contained logistics, names, dates, shipment codes. It became clear that the message wasn't just about territory. It was about control of a new network, human trafficking routes, fentanyl distribution, and extortion schemes disguised through legitimate businesses. Inside City Hall, the mayor faced reporters with a rehearsed calm. "We will not bow to intimidation," she declared. But her words barely echoed before being drowned out by the reality on the ground. The Mara had made their move not through violence alone, but through symbolism. The fires were their stage, the city their audience, and behind every public act there was a darker strategy unfolding in silence. For weeks, every neighborhood lived in a suspended state of fear. Anonymous phone calls flooded police lines with threats. Officers began wearing bulletproof vests off duty. Some families left Los Angeles altogether, unable to sleep through the sound of distant gunshots. Every spray-painted wall became a warning, every black car slowing down on a corner, a possible sign. And then came the second message. Short, written across an elementary school fence. "You protect them, we find you." It was no longer just a warning to the city. It was a direct challenge to law enforcement. Journalists began connecting the dots. The timing of the attacks matched federal crackdowns against MS-13 leaders in the East Coast. Experts suggested that the Los Angeles operation was revenge, a show of strength to remind Washington that the gang's influence reached from Maryland to California. Some reports even hinted that the cartel had infiltrated local construction companies and transport lines, laundering money and hiding operatives in plain sight. The city's fear became part of everyday life. News channels repeated the same footage: burning cars, terrified witnesses, graffiti glowing under police lights. But what they didn't show was the transformation beneath it all, a city realizing that it no longer belonged to itself. In the alleyways of East LA, old men whispered that this wasn't a comeback. It was a takeover. The Mara Salvatrucha wasn't announcing their return. They were reminding everyone they never really left. As night fell once more, Los Angeles shimmered under a thin layer of dread. From the Hollywood Hills to the back streets of Pico Union, people locked their doors, avoided eye contact, and prayed the chaos would pass. But those who had lived through the first wave of MS-13 violence in the 1990s knew better. They understood that the Mara didn't strike for chaos alone. They struck for order, their own kind of order, built on fear, loyalty, and silence. And so, the first warning had done its job. The message had been delivered, not to the police, not to the government, but to the people themselves. The city had heard it loud and clear. The streets, the corners, the shadows, all belonged to them once again. To understand the fear that gripped Los Angeles, you have to travel back in time, to a city that was already broken, and to a generation that had nowhere else to go. The story of the Mara Salvatrucha didn't start with drugs or money. It began with survival. In the 1980s, Los Angeles was a magnet for war refugees fleeing El Salvador's civil conflict. Families crossed borders with nothing but plastic bags and trauma in their eyes. They arrived in a city that didn't welcome them. They were pushed into the violent corners of Pico Union and Westlake, where poverty mixed with desperation and where another kind of war was already being fought, the war of the streets. In those neighborhoods, survival required a flag, a name, a sense of belonging. Young Salvadoran boys, many of them orphans or children of soldiers, began forming their own groups to protect themselves from established gangs like the Mexican Mafia and the 18th Street Gang. They called themselves Mara Salvatrucha. Mara meaning gang, Salva for Salvadoran, and Trucha, a slang for stay sharp. What began as a defensive brotherhood soon turned into something darker. These young men had grown up in war. They carried the trauma of combat into the streets of America. They had seen executions, burned villages, and corpses on dirt roads before they were 10 years old. Violence wasn't foreign, it was familiar. By the late 1980s, the MS-13 had already learned the rhythm of the Los Angeles underworld. They adopted the aesthetics of American gangs, tattoos, hand signs, and street codes, but their mindset was different. Their violence wasn't ritualistic, it was instinctive. They didn't just fight to dominate turf, they fought to exist. When the US government responded with mass deportations in the 1990s, thousands of Salvadoran gang members were sent back to Central America. Washington believed it was cleansing its streets. What it didn't realize was that it was exporting a virus. Back in El Salvador, those deported men found a country in ruins. Civil war had left the economy destroyed and the police weak. It was the perfect breeding ground for organized chaos. MS-13 took root there like wildfire, building an empire that mixed military discipline with street-level ruthlessness. Soon, their network stretched from San Salvador to Tegucigalpa to Los Angeles again, a triangle of violence sustained by fear, loyalty, and the flow of cocaine and human lives across borders. Los Angeles, once the birthplace of their struggle, became the cartel's American stage. They didn't need to conquer new cities, they needed to reclaim the old ones. By the early 2000s, the Mara Salvatrucha had transformed from a neighborhood gang into a transnational criminal organization with its own hierarchy, communication system, and economy. Intelligence reports later revealed that leaders inside Salvadoran prisons were sending orders directly to lieutenants in California. Murders, drug shipments, kidnappings, everything was controlled remotely across thousands of miles. It was globalization in its most terrifying form. The LAPD knew it was dealing with something new. These weren't disorganized criminals, they were soldiers. Former members of the Salvadoran army had joined the gang, teaching tactics learned in the jungles of Central America. Drive-bys were replaced by coordinated ambushes. Threats became coded messages. Every hit, every symbol carried purpose. For the first time, Los Angeles wasn't facing a gang, it was facing a paramilitary network. During this time, the neighborhoods that once gave birth to MS-13 became their sanctuary again. Families who tried to resist faced extortion, kidnapping, or worse. Local community centers and churches turned into refugees for those trying to escape the grip. But even the church couldn't always protect them. Priests who spoke against the Mara were threatened. Social workers disappeared. The line between civilian life and gang territory blurred completely. When the US began its war on gangs in the 2000s, federal agents targeted MS-13 leaders across multiple states. Dozens were arrested, and their operations seemed crippled. But the cartel had learned from history. They decentralized. Instead of collapsing, they adapted, like a virus mutating to survive the cure. While the media celebrated victories, the gang was silently reorganizing. They stopped calling themselves just a gang. Inside, they used the term La Organización, the organization. The new phase was marked by infiltration. Legitimate businesses, auto shops, food trucks, cleaning services became fronts for money laundering. The cartel began working with other criminal groups, including Mexican cartels who needed local distributors. They became middlemen in a much larger machine that controlled drugs, weapons, and even human smuggling routes through California. And behind every transaction, there was the same guiding principle: loyalty above all, silence at any cost. By the mid-2010s, the MS-13 network in Los Angeles had entered its most dangerous form: invisible control. There were fewer street brawls, fewer public shootings. Instead, there were disappearances, quiet threats, and coded messages delivered through social media or graffiti. Their power no longer came from numbers, it came from fear. A single phrase whispered in Spanish, "Ten cuidado con ellos," be careful with them, was enough to silence entire blocks. Then came 2020. The pandemic created chaos, unemployment, and isolation, the perfect environment for recruitment. The Mara returned to the streets, masked not only by bandanas, but by a world distracted by its own collapse. While police departments were stretched thin and communities were paralyzed by uncertainty, the cartel strengthened its grip once again. They fed the hungry, offered protection, and punished those who resisted. In the absence of the state, they became the state. And when the world reopened, they were ready to step into the light again. The new generation of MS-13 was born out of a globalized digital world. They weren't just tattooed soldiers anymore. They were hackers, couriers, strategists. Their influence spread from street corners to online marketplaces. What began as a gang of abandoned boys had evolved into a complex criminal network that could move drugs, people, and fear with equal efficiency. That's why, when the message "Los Angeles belongs to us" appeared, it wasn't random. It was history repeating itself. It was a full circle drawn in blood, from the refugee camps of El Salvador to the streets of Los Angeles, back to the digital age of global terror. For the Mara Salvatrucha, Los Angeles was never just a city. It was home, their origin, their throne. And now, after decades of silence, they were claiming it once again. When the first wave of terror hit Los Angeles, most people saw it as chaos. But for those who understood the language of power, it wasn't chaos. It was choreography. Every symbol, every fire, every whisper carried meaning. The message the Mara Salvatrucha left behind wasn't simply a warning, it was a code. And decoding it meant stepping into the darkest corners of the city's underworld, where communication wasn't done with words, but with fear. Investigators soon realized that the phrase "Los Angeles belongs to us" wasn't a spontaneous act of rebellion. It was a strategic manifesto. The graffiti appeared in locations that weren't random at all. They were key transit points, bridges, tunnels, and intersections that connected the port of Long Beach with major freeways heading east toward Arizona and Nevada. These routes were vital for the movement of drugs, weapons, and human cargo. The message was territorial, yes, but it was also economic. The Mara wasn't simply claiming neighborhoods, they were declaring control over the arteries of the city itself. At the FBI's Los Angeles field office, Special Agent Marsha Raines stared at a satellite map dotted with red marks, each one representing a location where the message had appeared. "They're not just marking turf," she said quietly. "They're drawing a route." The realization hit her team like a cold wave. The cartel's communication wasn't meant for civilians or even the police. It was aimed at other criminal organizations, especially the rival 18th Street Gang and local distributors tied to Mexican cartels. The message was a declaration. The Mara Salvatrucha was back in business, and anyone crossing their routes would pay in blood. But there was more. Embedded within the graffiti, agents noticed subtle differences, variations in color and line style that, when analyzed, revealed a secondary layer of meaning. Cyber analysts discovered that these marks corresponded to numbers hidden within coordinates, a code referencing encrypted communication channels on the dark web. There, hidden in plain sight, investigators found posts using the same phrase "Lay belongs to us" as a trigger for activation. It was a call to arms, sent to operatives across the US and Central America. Within hours of decoding, 2 retaliatory attacks occurred in Maryland and Texas, both targeting rival affiliates. The message was alive, spreading like a virus. For the public, the Mara's return looked like a wave of street violence. But for insiders, it was a psychological operation. They called it La Estrategia del Miedo, the strategy of fear. The goal wasn't to kill everyone. It was to make everyone believe they could be next. Fear, when managed properly, was more powerful than bullets. It silenced witnesses, paralyzed authorities, and forced entire communities into submission without firing a shot. And fear, in the hands of a group as disciplined as MS-13, became a science. Detective Ortega, who had spent decades studying gang behavior, knew that what they were facing wasn't just criminal, it was cultural. "They understand something we don't," he said during a late-night briefing. "They know that fear isn't spread by what happens, it's spread by what people believe will happen." That belief became the true battlefield. When the message appeared, news outlets, social media, and government agencies amplified it, feeding the very narrative the Mara wanted. Every headline about the return of MS-13 became free propaganda for their cause. Every panic-filled tweet was another echo of their control. Behind the scenes, federal agencies tried to locate the origin of the campaign. The video of masked men claiming responsibility had been uploaded from a VPN linked to an account traced to El Salvador. But further investigation showed that the servers were bouncing through multiple countries: Guatemala, Mexico, even the US itself. It was impossible to know where the voice came from. That was the genius of the message. It existed everywhere and nowhere, like a ghost haunting both hemispheres. Meanwhile, inside Los Angeles, something more subtle was happening. Informants began disappearing. Community leaders who had worked with anti-gang programs vanished overnight. Journalists who had covered the graffiti found threatening notes taped to their doors. "You talk, you disappear," one note said, written in red marker. The city's silence deepened. It wasn't just fear anymore, it was obedience. Experts in criminal psychology began studying the Mara's tactics and compared them to insurgency models used by guerrilla forces during the Salvadoran War. What they found was chilling. The same psychological structure applied to urban warfare. The gang had learned how to manipulate perception, how to make a single act of violence feel like an entire movement. By attacking selectively and spreading misinformation online, they created the illusion of omnipresence. In truth, there were fewer than 1,000 active members in Los Angeles, but through terror, they made it seem like tens of thousands. The message also had another layer: revenge. In the months before the graffiti appeared, the US government had extradited several top MS-13 leaders to New York and Washington for federal prosecution. Among them was one known as El Verdugo, the executioner, a feared figure who had coordinated cross-border operations. His arrest had been celebrated as a victory. But inside the Mara's code, the message, "Los Angeles belongs to us," included a hidden tribute. The letters LA also stood for Los Angeles, but in their internal slang they referred to Los Amigos, the friends, the code name for imprisoned leaders. The graffiti was not only a threat, it was a promise of loyalty. The streets were rising in their honor. As the days passed, investigators started noticing a rhythm to the chaos. Attacks, arsons, and disappearances followed dates tied to old battles between MS-13 and rival gangs from the 1990s. Each act was symbolic, replaying history as if the gang were rewriting its myth in blood. It became clear that this wasn't just about control, it was about identity. The Mara Salvatrucha wasn't sending a message to the government. They were sending it to themselves, to remind their members of who they were, of the fear they once commanded, and of the empire they intended to rebuild. By the end of the month, the city's fear had reached a breaking point. Schools increased police presence, businesses installed steel shutters, and curfews were quietly reintroduced in high-risk neighborhoods. But while everyone looked at the streets, the real operation was happening elsewhere. Intelligence units discovered that during the chaos, millions of dollars had been moved through cryptocurrency wallets connected to shell companies in Los Angeles. The fires and graffiti were diversions, a smokescreen to mask a massive financial transfer between US and Central American cells. The message had worked in more ways than one. It distracted, terrified, and profited. When Agent Rains looked again at the map, she realized that every line of graffiti, every coded post, and every violent act wasn't random. It was a mirror. The message didn't just tell the world that the Mara owned Los Angeles. It showed that Los Angeles had become a reflection of everything the Mara represented: corruption, fear, and survival through domination. The city wasn't just their stage, it was their statement, and somewhere, hidden among the millions who watched the news, someone smiled, not because of what was said, but because the real message had been received perfectly. Power is not taken by force, it's taken by fear. The warning signs were there long before the first bullet was fired. For weeks, Los Angeles police officers had been finding strange markings near their homes. Symbols carved on fences, blue bandanas tied to mailboxes, and stickers bearing the number 503, the Salvadoran country code. At first, they dismissed them as random acts of intimidation. But soon, the patterns became impossible to ignore. The Mara Salvatrucha wasn't just threatening civilians anymore, they were hunting those who enforced the law. It began quietly, with whispers spreading through the precincts. A detective's car set ablaze outside his home in Highland Park. An officer's teenage son followed after school by two masked men who vanished before the patrols arrived. And then, the first direct hit. Officer Ramon Diaz, a 6-year LAPD veteran, was ambushed while driving home from his night shift. His vehicle was riddled with bullets. He died before backup arrived. On the wall beside the crime scene, investigators found the same phrase, written in blood-red spray paint: "No one protects you." For the department, it was an act of war. For the Mara, it was theater. Every attack was deliberate, every body a message. The goal wasn't just to kill, it was to humiliate. They wanted to show that even the protectors could bleed. Within days, morale inside the LAPD began to crumble. Officers refused to patrol alone. Families moved out of vulnerable neighborhoods. At roll calls, captains tried to sound defiant, but their eyes betrayed exhaustion. Fear had entered the ranks, and fear spreads faster than fire. In an emergency meeting at the federal building downtown, the city's top law enforcement officials gathered under the harsh glow of fluorescent lights. The air was heavy with unease. FBI Special Agent Raines opened the session with blunt words. "They've shifted tactics. They're targeting authority now." She projected images onto the screen, maps of recent attacks, intercepted communications, and a list of officers' names that had appeared on Cartel-linked forums. "They're watching us," she said. "They know our routines, our shifts, even our families." The room fell silent. The investigation revealed that the Mara had infiltrated private security companies and municipal data systems. Through these, they accessed personal information about officers, addresses, vehicles, family members. They didn't need to attack the police directly, they only had to make them feel vulnerable. Fear, once again, was the real weapon. The cartel understood something crucial about American law enforcement. It was built on the illusion of control. Shatter that illusion, and the system collapses from within. Outside the stations, patrol cars started being followed. Unmarked vans appeared near police residences. Officers received anonymous texts saying things like, "We see you," or "You shouldn't have come home last night." Each message, each small act, eroded the barrier between personal safety and public duty. The Mara was proving that the badge no longer guaranteed protection. It guaranteed exposure. The media got wind of it quickly. News anchors spoke in hushed tones about unconfirmed threats against police. On social media, videos circulated showing masked men driving past police stations, filming themselves laughing. "You protect them, but who protects you?" they said in Spanish, their voices distorted by filters. The message spread like wildfire. Within a week, the city's trust in law enforcement fractured completely. Civilians stopped reporting crimes, witnesses vanished, police lines went silent. It was then that the cartel made their boldest move. A video was released anonymously through encrypted channels. It showed several LAPD patrol cars burning in an empty lot at night. Behind the flames stood a line of silhouettes, dozens of men wearing black masks and holding rifles. A distorted voice spoke over the crackling fire. "This city does not fear the law anymore. The law fears us." The video was titled simply, Chapter 2. The FBI confirmed the authenticity of the footage. The burned vehicles had been stolen days earlier from an LAPD impound lot. The theft had gone unnoticed. To the investigators, that was the most disturbing part, how the Mara had managed to infiltrate the system so deeply, right under their noses. Inside the task force, suspicion began to grow. Could someone from within be helping them? Agent Rains ordered internal audits and background checks across all departments. The results were terrifying. Several lower-level officers and civilian contractors were discovered to have connections with known MS-13 affiliates. Some had been bribed, others threatened. Through these insiders, the gang obtained sensitive information, surveillance schedules, patrol zones, and even the names of informants. In at least one case, an informant who was about to testify disappeared the same night his file was accessed by a compromised employee. His body was found days later, dumped in the Los Angeles River, his mouth sewn shut, a symbol the Mara used for traitors. The FBI dubbed the ongoing campaign Operation Silence. Its goal, to dismantle the cartel's communication and psychological warfare network. But every step forward came with 2 steps back. Informants went dark, wiretaps yielded nothing but static. And every time agents believed they had contained the threat, another message appeared on social media, on walls, even projected on buildings at night. One night, downtown commuters froze as a massive blue projection illuminated the side of a skyscraper, the letters MS-13 pulsing with the words, "We see everything." The city became a breathing organism of paranoia. Police helicopters circled endlessly over neighborhoods where no crimes were reported. Officers stopped trusting one another. Families of law enforcement members began receiving anonymous calls in the middle of the night. Heavy breathing, a click, then silence. The message was clear. You're never safe. The U.S. government raised the threat level for transnational criminal activity in California. Homeland Security labeled the events domestic infiltration by a foreign-influenced organization. Yet, within the chaos, the Mara's plan remained invisible. While the authorities scrambled to defend themselves, the cartel solidified its grip over the city's logistics routes, trucks, warehouses and docks, expanding its operations with surgical precision. The attacks on police were a distraction, an orchestrated illusion designed to paralyze response. And it worked. By the end of the second month, Los Angeles had changed. The once bold police presence shrank from the streets. Community trust had evaporated. Patrols became rare in certain neighborhoods, now branded as no-go zones. The city that once prided itself on law and order now lived under a new unspoken rule. Whoever controls fear controls everything. Detective Ortega summed it up best in his final report to the task force. They're not trying to win the war against the police. They're trying to make the police irrelevant. His words captured the core of the crisis. Because in Los Angeles, justice wasn't being defeated by violence, it was being replaced by it. The Mara Salvatrucha had succeeded in turning fear into power, and power into control. The law was no longer feared by criminals. The law feared them. The city no longer looked like Los Angeles. It looked like a fortress built on fear. Checkpoints, military vehicles, surveillance drones, they had become part of the skyline, as ordinary as the palm trees that lined the boulevards. Yet beneath that illusion of control, something else was happening, something the public couldn't see. A war was being fought, but not the kind with bombs and battle lines. It was a silent, invisible conflict. One waged in alleys, through encrypted phones, in the shadows between law and chaos. The Mara Salvatrucha had turned Los Angeles into a chessboard. Every move the authorities made was anticipated, mirrored, and countered. Every operation seemed compromised before it even began. The cartel's messages had evolved from graffiti to digital warfare. They hijacked social media accounts of local journalists, spreading false information about police raids and fabricated arrests. Panic spread faster than truth. The city's information system, the heartbeat of its security, was under siege. At first, it looked like coincidence. Then the FBI's cyber division uncovered a terrifying reality. The Mara had hackers, not the stereotypical street criminals of old, but professionals, engineers, coders, and digital mercenaries working from Central America and Eastern Europe. Through encrypted networks, they penetrated police databases, accessed confidential reports, and even altered public safety maps to redirect patrols. Law enforcement was being manipulated from within its own systems, forced to fight a ghost it could neither see nor predict. Agent Rains was the first to call it what it truly was, a hybrid war. She explained it to her exhausted team one night in the war room, a converted basement beneath the federal building. "This isn't about drugs anymore," she said. "It's about control, psychological, territorial, digital. They're using every tool of modern warfare except missiles." She pointed to a map where the city glowed red and blue, with markers representing both confirmed and suspected cartel activities. "This," she said, "isn't gang activity. This is insurgency." Meanwhile, inside the neighborhoods most affected, South Central, Boyle Heights, MacArthur Park, life had shifted into a new rhythm. The streets looked normal in the daylight, kids playing basketball, women selling tamales, men fixing cars on the curb. But beneath the surface, everyone was part of the war, whether they wanted to be or not. Corner stores paid taxes to operate safely. Bus drivers memorized routes that avoided cartel watch zones. Even pastors received coded warnings during Sunday Mass, reminding them not to mention them in their sermons. What was once a criminal organization had now become an invisible government. They provided protection where the state had withdrawn. They punished crimes faster than the police. They controlled silence like a commodity. If a shooting happened, no one called 911. Within minutes, a white van would appear, remove the body, and erase the evidence. Life went on, as if nothing had happened. Fear had become the glue that held the city together. Inside a warehouse near the port of Los Angeles, the real war was unfolding. Federal agents had uncovered intelligence pointing to a shipment of weapons disguised as agricultural supplies. The tip came from a former member of the cartel, known only as Culebra, the snake. He claimed the cargo contained military-grade rifles and explosives meant to arm local cells, but when the task force raided the site, they found nothing. The containers were empty, cleaned out hours before. On one of the metal walls, written in black marker, was a single sentence: "You're always late." It was a game of humiliation. Every failed operation demoralized the agents further. Someone inside was leaking information, again. Surveillance teams spent days monitoring suspected insiders, but the cartel's reach was too deep. The Mara didn't need to bribe everyone. They only needed to control a few key players: a logistics clerk, a communications technician, a data analyst. Through them, they stayed one step ahead of the government, moving like smoke through cracks of bureaucracy. Outside, violence escalated with a new level of sophistication. The gang stopped targeting only police or rivals. Now they attacked symbols, courthouses, news vans, city government buildings. Small explosions, calculated to create panic, but not full destruction. The FBI identified the pattern. Each bombing coincided with federal hearings or new anti-gang legislation. The Mara wasn't just defending its empire, it was sending political messages. The US government, desperate to control the narrative, began denying connections between the incidents and the cartel. But leaks from intelligence insiders told a different story. They described an ongoing operation named Shadow Tide, a secret joint task force involving the CIA, DEA, and Salvadoran intelligence. Its mission: infiltrate the Mara's leadership circle and neutralize its communications chain. But even that operation was compromised. 2 agents disappeared in Guatemala while tracking cartel financiers. Their last transmission was a chilling audio clip, a distorted voice whispering, "The city remembers its creators." Back in Los Angeles, Detective Ortega felt the city's pulse tightening. Each morning, he drove through streets he no longer recognized. The walls that once carried colorful murals now displayed grim messages: skulls, crossed machetes, and the numbers 13 painted over police symbols. He'd seen wars before, but this one was different. It wasn't fought for territory or profit alone. It was fought for identity. The Mara Salvatrucha was redefining itself not as a criminal group, but as a movement. They began recruiting differently. Gone were the days of loud initiation rituals and violent street tests. Now, the Mara targeted the invisible ones: disillusioned youth, gig workers, undocumented immigrants, and even veterans. They offered money, protection, and belonging. The recruiters called it El Nuevo Pacto, the New Pact. Its promise was simple: loyalty in exchange for purpose. And in a city fractured by poverty, alienation, and mistrust, that promise resonated like gospel. While the authorities hunted ghosts, the Mara built communities, dark reflections of the ones the state had failed to protect. They opened underground clinics for injured members, provided food during blackouts, and even enforced curfews. They became judge, jury, and executioner, wrapped in the illusion of order. The lines between gang and government blurred until even ordinary citizens no longer knew who truly ruled them. As the months dragged on, the city's fear hardened into resignation. Reporters stopped asking questions. Police avoided certain streets. The government spoke only in generalities, refusing to admit how deep the infection had spread. And yet, in the middle of this silence, another message appeared, projected once more on a downtown building at midnight. The city of angels has fallen. People stopped in the streets to watch, phones recording, mouths open in disbelief. For 10 long minutes the message pulsed in electric blue over the skyline before vanishing. But its impact lingered like smoke. The next morning, an anonymous post appeared online. "The war is over. You just didn't notice who won." In that moment, Los Angeles understood the truth. The Mara didn't need to conquer the city through violence. They had already conquered its soul, through fear, silence, and control. The hidden war had ended without a single declaration, and the victors were everywhere, unseen, smiling in the shadows of the city of angels. It was early morning when the final message appeared. The sky above Los Angeles was the color of ash, the streets unusually quiet. People awoke to the sound of helicopters circling overhead, but this time it wasn't the police who controlled the air. It was the message, broadcast across every major digital billboard from downtown to Inglewood. In bright white letters over a black background, 3 words pulsed rhythmically like a heartbeat: "We never left." Beneath them, the blue and black insignia of the Mara Salvatrucha. The authorities scrambled to shut down the transmission, but by the time technicians reached the central control servers, the broadcast had already replicated itself across independent street screens and hijacked digital ads on mobile devices. Even the city's emergency alert system was overridden for 30 seconds, long enough for millions to see the same image on their phones, tablets, and televisions. The cartel had found a way to speak directly to the people, bypassing every barrier, every government wall. It wasn't just a declaration, it was a coronation. Inside the LAPD command center, chaos erupted. Agents barked orders, analysts tried to trace the digital signal, and the mayor's voice trembled as she demanded answers. But no one had any. The FBI cyber unit determined the feed originated from multiple international servers: El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala, even one routed through Washington, D.C. It was a network so sophisticated that shutting it down was like trying to stop a hurricane with a net. The Mara's reach had gone global, and Los Angeles had become its loudest symbol. As the message repeated across screens, another image appeared, a burning American flag dissolving into the shape of angel wings. Then came the voice. Calm, measured, and chillingly human. You can build walls, you can raise armies, but fear belongs to us. The city froze. Every word echoed through televisions, radios, and phones like a curse. You call us criminals, we call you blind. You protect a system built on lies, we only hold up the mirror. The voice paused as if waiting for an answer. Then, softly, the city is ours again. The broadcast ended as abruptly as it began. Silence returned, not peace, but the kind of silence that follows an earthquake when everyone wonders if the ground will shake again. For hours, no one spoke. No one dared. Schools closed early, traffic vanished, and the usual hum of Los Angeles, horns, chatter, music, was replaced by an oppressive quiet. It was as if the city itself was holding its breath. But the silence didn't last. Across neighborhoods, residents began receiving anonymous texts, all identical. If you see, you stay silent. If you talk, you disappear. Within 24 hours, 3 community activists vanished. A local journalist who had written about the cartel's digital propaganda was found dead in her car, her laptop missing. The message had turned from digital to physical, from symbol to execution. Fear wasn't just spreading anymore. It had become the law. Federal forces launched a massive counter-operation, raiding dozens of suspected cartel properties in the greater Los Angeles area. But once again, they found nothing. Empty warehouses, burned documents, cold traces of encrypted data that led nowhere. It was as if the Mara had evaporated, leaving behind only echoes of their presence. The only tangible evidence was a new piece of graffiti found near one of the raid sites, a large mural showing a police badge dissolving into dust. Underneath, a sentence written in Spanish, El miedo no se destruye, se hereda. Fear is not destroyed, it's inherited. That was the moment Agent Rains realized the war was never about drugs, power, or even territory. It was about control of memory. The Mara didn't need to rule the city forever. They just needed to leave a scar deep enough that no one would dare challenge them again. The fear they planted would outlive them, passed down from parent to child, whispered in stories and warnings. The cartel had transformed itself into something more dangerous than an organization. It had become an idea. As days passed, the panic mutated into exhaustion. Los Angeles began to return to its routines, pretending that normalcy had returned. But the change was irreversible. Police presence was heavier yet less trusted. Media outlets avoided the topic altogether. The government issued statements about progress and safety, but no one believed them. The city's silence had become its new religion, and silence, as the Mara understood, is a form of submission. Detective Ortega walked those streets one last time before turning in his badge. The walls told stories only he could read. The faint outlines of erased graffiti, the quiet glances of people who refused to speak, the corners where once the law had ruled. He stopped at an alley where, months ago, he had found the first message, "Los Angeles belongs to us." Now that message was gone, painted over in beige, but he could still feel it there, underneath the surface. He whispered to himself, "They don't need to write it anymore. Everyone already knows." Meanwhile, deep in the digital underworld, the final act of the Mara's campaign unfolded. A video surfaced online under an anonymous account. It showed no faces, no guns, just a slow montage of the city. Downtown at dusk, a police car parked under a broken streetlight, a family locking their door for the night. A voice narrated in Spanish, soft and solemn. "You call us monsters, but we were born from your silence. You made us when you forgot the poor, when you ignored the broken, when you buried our dead without names. We are your reflection." The video ended with the words in white letters, "Silence or submission. You choose." Authorities quickly removed it from all major platforms, but the video had already been shared millions of times, translated into multiple languages. The message transcended borders. It was no longer just about Los Angeles. It was about every city where poverty and neglect gave birth to desperation. The Mara Salvatrucha had evolved from a gang into a myth, from a name whispered in fear to a symbol of resistance and terror intertwined. They had rewritten the story of power, not through victory but through endurance. In the final report submitted to Washington, Agent Rains wrote one chilling line: "The Mara Salvatrucha has proven that domination no longer requires territory, only influence." She was right. The gang didn't need to win battles. They only needed to be remembered. And so, as the sun set over Los Angeles, painting the horizon in hues of red and grey, the city stood quiet, beautiful and broken. The fear hadn't vanished. It had simply changed form, living in every cautious glance, every unspoken word, every locked door. The people of Los Angeles had learned the final truth the hard way. In a world ruled by fear, silence is not safety.